Yeah, I want to tell you the backstory behind what Enas talked about. Yeah, she was one of our original members. But I think the story of how the idea came up is rather instructive. So I lived in Gaza for 3 years, and I found that every time I would go out to visit family, I would have a really hard time getting back in. And this was one of the times, it was just after the 2014 war. I had gone out right before, couldn't get back in. And Mohammed El-Kurd, I know I mispronounce his last name, I always do, he laughs about it, but he was a young man I had known casually when I was living there. And I noticed on his Facebook page that his profile photo had gone completely black. And so I figured, okay, something's up. So I just messaged him, and I said, Ahmed, what's going on? How are you? And he answered, I'm fine. And of course, I don't trust that word. Anybody in Gaza knows this by now. They answer fine or okay. My immediate response is, no, tell me something real. I know that word's not real. And that's when he told me that his brother, actually his brother, his cousin, and his 3 best friends had been killed in the war. And he had idolized his brother. And so he was just devastated is a gross understatement. And I think all of us, when we encounter that kind of loss, sometimes our response is to avoid the subject and try to make them feel better. And I decided to take the opposite approach. I knew Ahmed, like most of the young people I met when I was living there were English literature majors. Not because they really loved literature, but because international NGOs are like one of the most common places to get good jobs there. And they have to know English well. It's the only way to try to learn English better is to become an English literature major. But they really struggled because there's not that many native speakers who taught English. So he was struggling, I knew that. So I said, okay, let's celebrate your brother with me. Tell me about him. Let's remember all the good memories. And while we're at it, to help you sort of refocus on your studies, write it for me. So over the next 3 months, we passed back and forth, because I'm a writer, I'm a journalist by training. I worked for the Chicago Tribune a long time ago. And so we passed back and forth this essay. And at one point, I realized he was holding back on me because I kept pushing him for anecdotes. The show, don't tell. Tell me little small stories about your brother that bring him alive. And I finally discovered why he was holding back. It's because his brother was killed because he was an Al-Qassam fighter. He was a resistance fighter. And he figured, because I was American, I was a Westerner, that I would have immediate judgment about his brother. Well, by that point, number one, I had started to know his brother I knew all about him as a kid. I knew him as a little boy. I knew him as an older brother. Also, of course, I lived in Gaza, so I wouldn't have felt that way anyway. But I realized then that we had a story that we were developing that really needed to be shared in America because, we revere our soldiers. Right? Like you'll be on a plane and they announce, who are the veterans, let's all clap for them. But we never take the trouble, it's even among activist circles. Even among all the activists I associate with, there's this belief that, everybody should be and we don't know them as humans. We don't know why they become resistance fighters. And Ahmed was telling me this story of who one of them was. So by the time we finished this essay, a couple of things happened. One is I was learning a lot, and I ended up being able to publish it. It was in a very progressive media, but as I said, even activists need to understand this because they have a lot of biases of their own. But Ahmed I saw him really coming alive. He was coming out of his depression. His English, he said, had improved more in, okay, yeah, is that better? Yeah. His English had improved more in 3 months than it had in 2 years. But I thought to myself, why not duplicate this? Why can't we duplicate this relationship? Where young people in Gaza have champions now overseas who help him write in English, excel in English, telling their story, their narrative in his own words, what his truth is. And that's what the genesis of We Are Not Numbers was, that's what we do. We pair young people who maybe never thought of themselves as writers. That's one thing that bothers me a lot is when you do have Palestinians who are quoted, it's always the same Palestinians. It's like the media latch on to one or two people who are really eloquent, and that's the only person you see. And yet, you know, there's a whole bunch of budding youth. I mean, and that's the other thing is youth in Gaza feel, they feel left out by their own NGOs. It's always, you know, and yet it's what, I don't know what the exact percentage is right now, but under the age of 25, it's actually more than half the population. So we need to give not only more attention to the youth, but to a wider variety of voices, and not always the same ones. And to find these budding writers who maybe didn't know they were writers, didn't know they were storytellers, didn't know they had a voice. And that was what Ahmed, he didn't know that he had a voice, he didn't know that he had anything to say. That's usually the biggest barrier I encounter when I mentor young people there, is they didn't know they had a story that anybody would want to know, you know, but they do. And so that's what we do. We find volunteer professional writers around the world who are native English speakers, who we match one-on-one, and we hope that in addition to helping them develop their own voice in English, they'll also develop friendships and champions, and they won't feel so isolated. But the other thing is, you know, Enas mentioned, originally when I came up with this idea, it was to bring alive all the people who were killed in the 2014 war. I wanted to tell those stories of those individuals. But I quickly realized that the real tragedy of Gaza is not the wars. That's when we pay attention to them. But that's the only time they really get attention. It's in between. When everybody goes and looks the other way and pretty much forgets about them, you know, that's when it's this grinding structural violence, you know, the lack of electricity, the no future, the no jobs, and nothing happening, no horizon for change that they can see. And so we switched the focus. And so now it's just really trying to elevate the everyday stories in all their complexity, because there's all different sides of Gaza. So that's, actually, I think that's like my main message I try to give to people is if we wonder why, and I hear this all the time from my friends, if we wonder why, well, why do they shoot rockets? Why do they protest and be willing to like lose their limbs when they know they're up against an enemy that's much bigger than they and it won't work? Well, they get attention. That's really the only time they get attention. So it's our own fault that they turn to that. I mean, I actually saw the last aggression that ended, you know, like was it last year? I saw them go through the biggest depression after that ended. Because for a while, they were being inundated with media requests. People were paying attention. They felt at least they were important. So the real depression came in when it ended. And then and life went back to the same, and nothing has changed. So my appeal to you is, please don't pay attention only during a war, or only when somebody's losing their lives or losing legs. We should be sustaining this attention every day. You know, the other challenge, I think, is the fact that it's hard to know what will change things. You know, I mean, I was actually talking to a young writer before I came in here, and he said, you have this elusive hope. You know it's not realistic, but that's the only thing you have to hold on to. So I think we have to find something concrete, and I like the call to include more Palestinians. Something concrete maybe we can do together. And I would just appeal to you please visit the site, wearenotnumbers.org, look at their stories. They're not journalists. Most of them choose to do personal essays because the first step is to let them know that they have a truth that's worth listening to. And it's not always talking to other people about their truth and stripping all their emotion from it. I think the place to start is telling them that no, your emotions, your feelings have value, and it's a side that people haven't heard. And I think Enas is an example. When she first started, I have to tell you, she was afraid. She was an introvert. She was afraid to interview anybody. She wouldn't go out without somebody escorting her. And now towards the end, she was going out and interviewing about doing the story about suicide she talked about by herself. I mean, she really, it's an amazing thing to watch somebody blossom. But she said last thing I'll say, she only did work for a while, for a year, and then left and then came back. It's because they need jobs. So the other thing I would say is it'd be lovely to be able to have enough money to be able to pay them for their work and show them that writing has value, even if you're not one of the very few that happen to get those plum journalism jobs. And that might be something to strive for as well. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.